All right. We will have a mailbag at the end of today's show. So just a reminder to you all to get your questions submitted in there. I got Vince in the chat with me. He's down there working, but then occasionally jumping in and starting questions for me. So that's greatly appreciated by my guy Vince. But so go get those questions in there. Just put a mailbox emoji, or go ahead and put an MB on there to get your questions submitted. We got 9 so far, so you can go ahead and get more of those put in there. So part 2 of today's show, we're going to talk about Notre Dame and the transfer portal. And obviously Notre Dame had a class that a lot of people are talking about as one of the top classes in the country. Even though it was a smaller class, you're seeing people rank it as a top 10 class. I think 247 Sports the other day had it ranked 9th on their not 247 Sports, excuse me, on 3 had it ranked as their I think number 9 overall class on the composite rankings. So I don't know what their individual rankings were. That's usually it's they do the composite thing. So, but they have Notre Dame ranked 9th. And of the teams that were ranked ahead of Notre Dame, who had 7 portal pickups, actually Notre Dame had 8. They didn't count the kicker, but of Notre Dame had 8. The teams above them, teams 1 through 8, had 17, 40, 21, 18, 31, 25, 17, 41, and then Notre Dame is at 7. The teams after them had 19, 41, 27, 24, 13 with Miami. The next highest ranked team that was below 10 was BYU at number 15. The next highest ranked team that had less than 10 was Stanford, all the way down at number 34. So Notre Dame didn't have a lot of need from a portal standpoint, but they certainly picked up impactful players. And obviously that includes them going out there and having the number 1 ranked recruiting class in the country, according to the On3 Arrivals ranking. So, when you look at it, guys, obviously this is a class that is going to be important for Notre Dame this season. It is. It's a class where you're going to ask it to make an impact at certain positions. You're hoping, at least anyway, that it makes an impact at certain positions. You're hoping that it can add depth in other positions. I think that's obviously a very important thing to have. I did look at the On3 247 rankings. They also have Notre Dame ranked 9th in the portal rankings as well. But when you look at this portal class, the expectations are high. But if you look at the talent, you're going to be like, okay, cool. That's why people are excited about this class. But if you then look at, okay, what was the overall proven production from the group, and you see that there's really only 2 guys that have any sort of extensive production over a period of time. Obviously, Francis Brew has 2 years worth of production. He was a big-time starter this year. DJ McKinney at cornerback obviously also has a lot of production. Not only the last 2 years of Colorado, but he was also a starter in 2023 at Oklahoma State for that Oklahoma State team that played for the Big 12 championship. And so actually it was 23 that Oklahoma, I believe so, right? 23 when Oklahoma State played Texas, I believe, in the Big 12 championship. I want to make sure I didn't just say something that was incorrect. Yes, Oklahoma State did play Texas in the Big 12 championship that season. And DJ McKinney was a part of that team. He was a starter at cornerback on that football team. So obviously he's a guy that has a lot of experience. But after that, you've got Quincy Porter had 4 catches at Ohio State last year. Milin Graham has 6 career catches in 2 years. Keon Gray was obviously someone who was an important part of the rotation for Oregon this year, but he wasn't a starter at Oregon. Jaden Sanders started about half the year at Michigan as a true freshman. He has a lot to prove. And then Keon Keely was just a rotation guy at Alabama. So there's a lot of this portal class that it's being hyped up, rightfully so, because of the potential and the raw talent of this group. Let's be honest. The only reason 247s or On3 has Quincy Porter as a top 25 transfer portal pickup, which they did, is because of where he was ranked in high school. There's no reason, based on what he did at Ohio State, to view him as someone who should be considered, and this is, again, according to On3, as the number 22 portal pickup in the country. he's number 45 by 247 Sports. Why? Is it because of they were super impressed on how good he looked in the 4 catches he had last year? No, it's because they're based that ranking off of his potential talent and what his high school ranking was. Otherwise, I'm going to have a hard time justifying why he was ranked. I think it was like 44. Let me pull up Francis Brew. Francis Brew on the On3 rankings was ranked as the number 68 transfer portal player. That's 46 spots below Quincy Porter. Why was he ranked that high on that ranking? Is it because of anything other than his talent? No, it's not. It's about his potential. And you look at 247 Sports had Tion Gray ranked number 17 as the overall portal player in the class. On3 had him at number 168. So even there's some very different evaluations going on of Notre Dame's players in the transfer portal. And one of the funnier ones was DJ McKinney. I thought his transfer portal rankings were kind of hilarious because he's got some really good film in 23 and 24. But neither of them had him even in the top 100. I think they're going to look back on that one and be like, yeah, I got that one wrong. But there's other guys. Obviously, Keon Keely, someone who a lot of people are talking about being a great pickup for Notre Dame. He had 3 sacks last year, 3 tackles for loss. He was the number 60 player in the country on the 247 transfer portal rankings. Why? It's only about because he's talented as an elite player. So that kind of got me thinking, like, look, we're all kind of just assuming that this portal class is going to be impactful. But if that's going to happen, and I think we all kind of agree that it's going to happen, what you're going to need is you're going to need some breakout players. You're going to need guys to take their game to another level. And so I'm going to talk about kind of go through each of the portal pickups, the position player portal pickups, and rank whether or not I'm going to kind of predict whether or not they have a breakout season and to what degree. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a heads up, I'm going to say they all are going to have some degree of breakout because even just from a reputation standpoint, but I think there's very varying degrees. So I'm going to have some fun with this one and talk about, where I see these guys. I want to get your thoughts also in the chat today. So as I go through each one of these players, I'm going to go offense first and defense second. I'm going to make my prediction. Are they going to have one of 2 breakouts? One is they become an impact player. 2 is they go from being a guy who didn't play a whole lot or was a rotation player to a guy that just plays more, a guy that has more of more production. He, has that breakout where he's significantly more impactful than he was last season for the team he played on, but still not that impact player. So I'm going to have that conversation and I'm going to make those predictions. And I want to hear what you guys think. Do you guys think the player that I'm talking about is going to be someone who becomes an impact player or someone who simply raises his game another level but isn't quite into that impact category? So, for example, last year, if you look at the portal pickups, I would say that Malachi Fields was not a breakout player from the standpoint of his production was greater than it was before. His impact was greater. He was exactly what Notre Dame hoped he would be, but he was already an established player. So he wouldn't be considered a breakout player, even though he was an impact player. There is no Malachi Fields really on this portal class except for DJ McKinney. So for Malachi to have been a breakout, he would have had to kind of really take a jump and become sort of a national name. That clearly didn't happen. You look at, some of the other portal pickups. You look at a guy like Jared Dawson. I think Jared Dawson did have a breakout for Notre Dame this season. I think he was much more impactful for Notre Dame in all ways than he was for Louisville. So that's kind of how I look at it. Some guys that were, Jaden Harrison. Did he have a breakout performance at Notre Dame? Not from a production standpoint, but he did from a reputation standpoint. That's, nobody had really heard of Jaden Harrison before. And then obviously he has some big moments for Notre Dame, but there was no jump in production. So that's not really a guy that would be considered a breakout player. So that's kind of how I look at it. And that's what makes this portal class so much different. Because in past portal classes, it was, hey, man, I just need you to keep doing what you've been doing. I would argue that Riley Leonard was a breakout player from Notre Dame from a reputation standpoint, but his production wasn't necessarily better than it was at past places. Because what's been unique about what Notre Dame has done in the past is the portal pickups they've gone after in past years are established players. Bo Collins was an established player. Chris Mitchell, Jaden Harrison, established players. Jack Cohn, established player. Riley Leonard, established player. RJ Oben, established player. Thomas Harper, Jordan Clark, Devontae Smith. You look at last year, look at Jalen Stroman. You look at the year before and look at, and I don't know why I can continue to forget Rod Hurd's name, but like first, I'm always like, I want to say something like Jeffrey or something. I don't have a clue why I want to do that. But Rod Hurd, established player, over 2,000 career snaps. What we haven't, and Vince's favorite player, I'm going to say this for Vince's benefit, Caden Madden, established player. What we haven't seen Notre Dame do a lot of is what they did this year, which is they went out and got guys with tools, with high upside, with impact talent, but not guys that were proven players. I think there's a couple reasons for that before we begin. Number one is I think Notre Dame wanted to have a portal class that was going to be more impactful. They wanted to have guys that had the higher level talent, but they didn't necessarily want to pay what it was going to cost to get that player. Because being smart, Notre Dame decided we want to use our money to keep the guys on our roster here. Keep Leonard Moore here. Keep a Don Schuler. Not that those guys were going to leave, but you go out and throw the money their way, you make sure that they don't leave. You wanted to retain the roster. They kind of followed the model that Ohio State did a couple years ago, although Ohio State got more established players from the portal, but they were high-level players. What Notre Dame did was they got high-level talent, even though they didn't necessarily get high-level players from an already proven production standpoint. So a guy like Cam Coleman is going to bring impact talent to Texas, but he's going to cost you a lot more, most likely, than what Quincy Porter or Milin Graham are going to cost you because they're not as proven. Now, trust me, those two guys were not cheap, especially Quincy Porter, but it's going to be significantly less than what Cam Coleman cost you. But if Notre Dame's kind of banking on the fact that, hey, with our coaching, with CJ Carr, with the opportunity, with the system, Quincy Porter could still have an impact and be an impact player, a breakout player. Same with Milin Graham. Same with Keon Keely. Keon Keely isn't going to cost you as much as David Bailey would have cost you if you went and got him from the portal last year. He's not going to cost you as much as what some of the other high-level, big-name defensive ends were costing people. He's not going to cost you as much as Damon Wilson cost Miami. But what Notre Dame is banking on is that with our development, with the system we have in place, with the people that around Keon, that we, looking at it from a defensive coaching standpoint and a coaching standpoint, is we can kind of get him to take his game to another level and get him to be an impact player that can play to the level of some of those guys. And same thing with Tion Gray. They could have gone out and got a more established defensive tackle. They didn't. Part of it was they missed on a couple guys. The other part of it is I don't know that Notre Dame necessarily wanted to pay the amount they needed to pay to get, the kid from Wake Forest. And that's probably your whole D-tackle budget right there in one guy, whereas you can go out and get two guys, Francis Brew and Tion Gray, for comparable money than what you would have probably paid to get the kid from Wake Forest. So I think there was some smart spending going on. I think they were looking for a couple different types of bodies at D-tackle, and it's going to be hard to get two top-level D-tackles because of the income. And the more proven a player is, the more he's going to cost. And so I think that's kind of where Notre Dame looked at this, is they went after not the big name guys, but they went after guys with ceilings and upside that fit what they do. So what that does is that leaves more potential for breakout players. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from. We're going to dive into this now. So as I'm going through this, I'm going to tell you guys what I think, and I'd like to hear your guys' predictions, realistic predictions. So don't tell me you guys going to have 120 catches for 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns to win the Heisman, and win the Biletnikoff. I want to have legitimate conversations. Again, this is about portal players. This isn't about the current roster. This is about portal players. I want to hear what you guys think that these guys are going to do. So I'm going to kick things off with Quincy Porter. So as I start talking about Quincy Porter, I want to hear your guys' predictions. A, is he going to be a breakout player or not? And is it going to be impact player or just good, solid rotation guy? And then B, what are some of your predictions for him for this year? So Quincy Porter is a receiver that I think could have two types of breakouts. One is he goes from being a guy that was basically a lightly used rotation guy that didn't play a ton for Notre Dame last year, or excuse me, for Ohio State last year, caught 4 passes before his season was cut short with an injury, but wasn't a guy that played a ton. He played he was targeted 4 times last year. He only played 57 snaps all season. 25 of them came against Grambling. He played against Grambling, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and UCLA before he was injured and lost for the rest of the season. Don't think it was a significant injury, but it was obviously one that cost him the rest of the year. When you have 4 catches, if you come out to Notre Dame this year and you have 25 catches for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns, that's a breakout. That's obviously a guy who went from being a backup who didn't play a whole lot to a very good productive part of your team. Then there's the other type of breakout where he comes out and he becomes more of an impact player. That can have some varying levels to it as well. You can have a breakout player that is going to, have, 60, 70 catches for 1,000 yards. But then there's a guy that I think would be a bit of a breakout to where I said earlier Malachi Fields wasn't a breakout for Notre Dame because he had already had production. But he's a guy that if you have 4 career catches and you have what Malachi Fields did, I think that is more of an impact breakout season. So when you look at Quincy Porter, I think you have to ask yourself, like, what level of breakout can he have? I think there's really 3 levels with him, and he's the only guy on this board outside of maybe Keon that could have the chance to do that, and I think he's by far has the best chance, and that is he could just be a breakout in that he's a good part of the rotation. He could have a breakout where he has a 30, 40 catch season for 600-plus yards, and that's a pretty darn good impactful breakout. Or he could have a full breakout and have like a Will Fuller type breakout, a Golden Tate type breakout, an Equanimous St. Brown type of breakout, where what those guys did is obviously in 2007, Golden Tate only caught 7 passes in 2007. And then the next year he goes out for Notre Dame in 2008 as a true sophomore, and he has 1,000 yards. Obviously Golden had 58 catches for 1,080 yards and 10 touchdowns. Looking at his numbers on his stats now online. Will Fuller had a similar thing. Will had, I think, 6 catches for like 160 yards. I'm pulling his numbers up now. He had 6 catches for 60 yards as a rookie freshman, 1 touchdown. Comes out as a true sophomore in 2014, 76 catches, 1,094 yards, and 15 touchdowns. Equanimous St. Brown had a similar situation. As a freshman at Notre Dame in 2015, he had 1 catch for 8 yards. Comes out as a true sophomore in only 12 games because Notre Dame didn't play a bowl game that year. Has 58 catches for 961 yards and 9 touchdowns. So we've seen guys like this do that. And I compare that more to those guys than I would like a Javon McKinley or Miles Boykin, who had big breakout final seasons. But those were older guys who had at least one season of okay 10 to 12, catch production. I'm more looking at the guys who went from freshman, no impact, to sophomore, big time impact. So I think there's a precedent at Notre Dame to see that from them. And again, folks, we're talking about portal players. So we'll talk about Notre Dame returners breaking out in another show. This is about portal players. So with Quincy, it's possible he could have a Golden Tate, Will Fuller type of breakout. I think he has that kind of talent, but I'm not predicting that. I think the first level breakout where he could have 25 catches for 350, 400 yards is the easiest one to get to. That also is the safest one when you consider he's coming off of an injury. And when you look at him, I don't think it's a major injury. I don't think it's one where it's going to need the same 8-month rehab like a torn ACL. I don't believe it's torn ACL. I don't know that it's been announced what it was. I don't think we're going to see him in the spring. I do think he'll be back and be able to go as we get closer to the fall. And I think that's going to kind of limit the ability to have like that big breakout season, because with Golden Tate and Will Fuller and Equanimous St. Brown, they were going into year 2 of the same system, basically. Now, what's interesting is two of the guys that I just mentioned were guys that played for Mike Denbrock, that were guys that were coached by Mike Denbrock. Obviously, Will Fuller was in year one of his breakout, came in year one of Mike Denbrock as the offensive coordinator, and Equanimous came in year three of Mike Denbrock as the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame. But they were already in the system for a year. They had been at Notre Dame for a year. This is different because this is a portal player learning a new system who probably won't be out there in the spring getting reps. That's just what I'm assuming based on, what I've heard about the injury that he had. So I think the level one is the most likely, but I'm actually going to go a little bit beyond that. And I'll tell you why. I'm actually going to go level two, where I think he could have a season that is similar to what Malachi Fields had. And obviously Malachi last year for Notre Dame had, see here, it was 40. What was his production? Let me see here. Let me pull it up here real quick. Give me a second. He had 36 catches for 630 yards and 5 touchdowns. I think we all agree that if Notre Dame needed to throw the ball more, that Malachi would have had more production. He was only stopped really by the fact that Notre Dame was such an offense built around its 2 stud running backs. But when I look at Quincy Porter and I look at what I think he's capable of, I don't think there's anything that could keep him from having a 30-plus catch season, averaging 15 to 17 yards a catch, 4 or 5 touchdowns. I don't think there's anything stopping him from doing that. And the biggest reason why is because I think it's an opportunity. When you look at Quincy Porter, there's nobody else like him on the roster. You could, people say, I think Milin Graham's going to have a bigger breakout. I'll get to Milin in a second. But with Milin Graham, he's competing for time at a spot where you have 2 returners already coming back. You have Jordan Faison at the X position. You have Jaden Greathouse coming back in the slot at the Z. Who's your returner at the boundary? Micah Gilbert, who had 9 catches last year. Cam Williams, Jerome Bettis Jr. There is nobody that's going to be able to say, hey, that's an established guy that you got to beat out. Now, listen, Quincy Porter's going to have his hands full having to beat out Micah Gilbert and Cam Williams and players like that. But I just think the path to him becoming that kind of player is a little bit cleaner early on than maybe it might be for Milin Graham. And now there's a chance that Notre Dame could play some Milin Graham, some in the boundary. You'd have to adjust your offense to do that, though. You'd have to. There's just things that you're not going to ask him to do. You're not going to ask him to catch back shoulder catches, like you did Malachi Fields, like you would do with Quincy Porter. You're not going to ask him to, just run stops and comebacks all day. You're not going to ask him to run a million backside digs in traffic. You're not going to be asking him to outplay people for the football. He's going to do more of the things you want as a Z. You want him to run, post curls and corners and speed cuts, and you want him to be doing post digs. You want to be running overs and crossers and climbs and things like that. You go routes. You want him running things where he's using his speed and you're trying to get him the ball in space. There's not a lot of that in the Notre Dame offense. Now they could adapt, and I would be all for that to try to get Milin some opportunities. But for him to get on the field, it's going to take away from Jordan Faison, Jaden Greathouse, and he's going to have to be competing against guys like Elijah Burris and perhaps Cam Williams for playing time as well. Quincy Porter, I think, has just an easier path. And so when I talk about breakouts for Notre Dame on offense, I have right now more confidence that Quincy's going to have a breakout season to that second level degree, 30-plus catches, 600 yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns, than I do Milin Graham because of the opportunity. It's not about who's a better player. It's about who's the fit in that boundary position. And I think right now Quincy Porter is that guy. So my sort of breakout prediction for him is that second level of player that has 35 plus catches, 550 plus yards, and 4 or 5 plus touchdowns. That's my prediction for Quincy Porter in his first season at Notre Dame, and why he is my first breakout player from the transfer portal. But let's talk about Milin Graham. I think you can make a case that Milin's game is more suited for immediate playing time for several reasons. Number one is he's already played more in his career. Obviously, he is a second-year player, whereas Quincy Porter is a first-year player. Milin Graham's going into his third year in college. He has played he's played more in his career, whereas Quincy Porter played 57 snaps this year. Milin Graham played 161. He has 176 career snaps, which is 3 times as many as Quincy Porter. Obviously, he had 2 years of coaching under Brian Hartline, which is, I think, going to benefit him. And I think he's a guy whose game is suited well to making an immediate impact. The only reason that I don't have Milin Graham, and I say this before I get there, I think Milin Graham, like Quincy Porter, is capable of a breakout of all 3 levels. There's no reason that he has the talent to come out and have a 50-plus, 60-plus season, 800 to 1,000 yards, especially if they play 15, 16 games. A guy that could come out, be the difference maker, he has the talent to eventually become their best receiver. That talent is there. The question, though, is does he go from a guy that hasn't played a whole lot of football to all of a sudden being a guy that plays more than Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse? A guy that produces more than Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse to the field? That I have a harder time seeing. I have a hard time seeing him not, of them not playing Greathouse and Faison. Could it happen? Of course. He's a talented player. But barring injury to one of those 2 guys, I just think Milin Graham's a guy that's more suited to be part of a really good 3-man rotation. So I don't know that top-level breakout is possible with him. Now, if there's an injury, I think he's the next man in, despite whoever gets injured. If Faison gets injured, then it's an easy transition. He steps in at the Z, and that's assuming he can beat out Elijah Burris, and that's not a given to me. But if Greathouse goes down again, then I think what Notre Dame does is just put him into the slot, put Jordan Faison into the slot, and slide Milin Graham into the starting Z position again, or X position again, assuming he can pass up Elijah Burris, which is not something I'm assuming. So that's going to be the big thing for Milin Graham, is just, will the opportunity be there for him to have that level of production? And I just don't think that it is. I think he's more of that second and first level type of production. My prediction for Milin Graham is, barring injury, he's not going to be on that second level of production. I don't see him being a 35 to 40 catch guy that has the kind of production that Malachi Fields had last year, that I think Quincy Porter can have last year. And the biggest reason why is that opportunity, as I just explained, opportunity. Will he get the opportunities to go out there and perform? I don't know that he's going to have the same number of opportunities that Quincy Porter is going to have. And then the second part of it to me is, I think Quincy Porter has a body that is more ready to make an immediate impact. I think Milin Graham still has some work to do as far as getting stronger and developing his game. As I mentioned on the board when Notre Dame was looking at him, I had a lot of concerns about going to get Milin Graham, mainly being the one thing I heard from all my Ohio State sources, present people that cover the team now or around the team now, and some people that have been there in the past, was, does Milin Graham understand the work ethic that it takes to maximize your potential? I feel that's a little bit more of a known with Quincy Porter than it is with Milin Graham. And your talent is impressive if you're Milin Graham, but it's not so impressive that if you don't put in the work like every single day to become the best version of yourself, you're not beating out Jordan Faison. You're not beating out Jaden Greathouse. You may not even beat out Elijah Burris. You may not beat out Cam Williams and Caden Finley if you don't put in that work. And even then, if you put in the work, you're still going to be part of a rotation. I just don't see a scenario, barring injury, where Milin Graham comes in and just, we don't see much of Jaden Greathouse or Jordan Faison. I just don't see that. What will be interesting is if they can find ways to move him around, but I don't know, where he can play some boundary, some field as well. But I don't know if a guy that has had some of these struggles that Milin Graham had is someone you're going to want to move around to various positions. I think you want to stick him in one spot and say, learn X. I think you're better off moving some other guys around. Now, if you do move those other guys around, there's a world in which we could see Jaden Greathouse playing the boundary and Jordan Faison playing the slot and Milin Graham's playing some of the field position. I could certainly see that. for Notre Dame. But my breakout prediction for Milin Graham is going to be more of the first level. I think that's where I see him this season. I look at Milin Graham a lot like I looked at Bryce Young last year, where we said he'll show growth this year, but the true breakout's coming in 2026. That's what we said about Bryce last summer going into 2025. And I think we were pretty right about that one. I think Bryce showed a lot of flashes this year. He was number 2 on the team in pressures, number 2 on the team in hits plus sacks on the quarterback, I believe, of defensive ends. And now he's poised for an even bigger breakout in 2026. And that's what I see with Milin Graham. I see a guy that I think is going to come in, battle for a rotation spot, get into the rotation, and make some plays. And then I think by the end of the year, probably plays a little bit more than he does early, and is a guy that goes from 6 catches this past year to 18 to 25 catches at least next season. That, to me, is a bit of a breakout. He's a guy that will be counted on to be an impactful player, but his impact will be more on the level of like kind of like here's how I view it. As simple as this. It's what we wished KK would have been this year. That's what I see Milin Graham, a guy that comes in, and you remember how KK looked against NC State, right? You know, a guy that came in and didn't catch a lot of balls, but man, when he made plays, he made big plays. I think that's what we see from Milin Graham. You know, 3 catches for 59 yards against NC State in the touchdown, 2 for 39 in a touchdown against Navy. I think we could see several performances like that from Milin Graham as the 3rd field receiver, or even, maybe even 4th field receiver, depending on how Elijah Burris does this offseason. And he has that, 18 to 25 catch season, averages 15 to 17 yards a catch, has 3 or 4 touchdowns. And you're like, boy, that's a real nice, good, solid breakout season. And next year, he's going to have an even bigger breakout. And he's, when Faison leaves, and he's going to have that real big breakout. That's how I see Milin Graham next season. So those are my predictions on offense. Let's move over to the defense now and talk a little defense. And a reminder, if you want to get some questions in for the mailbag at the end, go ahead and throw those in now. I got Vince helping me out. He's starring those questions. So go ahead and hit MB on there for a mailbag, or put a mailbox emoji, and we will get those questions answered for you at the end of the show. Let's talk defense. This is an interesting one, and I'm gonna break this one down. I'm gonna go kind of position by position. I thought about doing it like breakout, like highest level breakout and that kind of thing. I'm just going to go position by position. I'm going to start up front and go inside out. We're going to start with Francis Brew. Now, Francis Brew is a player that is going to have the toughest time having a breakout season because he's the most proven, in my opinion, of the players, both from a production standpoint, but also a reputation standpoint. Like from a production standpoint, in a how much he's played, I think that DJ McKinney is the most proven player. He's played the most. He's had the most production, but he doesn't come in with the reputation that Francis Brew has. So, I mean, people know who Francis Brew is. He was an All-ACC player last year. I think 3rd team All-ACC last year. Guy that had production, a guy that was coveted out of the portal. Ohio State looked at him. Tennessee looked at him. So I think he has a little bit of a higher floor, but also it's going to mean that first level breakout is not there for him. He's already had that. You could even argue, and I would actually argue this, that he even had that second level breakout for Pitt last year. And, you're talking about a guy that as a true freshman, even though what's interesting is he was a Pro Football Focus freshman All-American in 2024, because they go off of their own grades. They don't go off of production. And he had 3 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, and had 15 tackles as a true freshman in 2024. And I think at least one of the All-American services had him as a freshman All-American that season as well. So he obviously is a guy that had success as a freshman, and then comes out in year 2 for Pitt, has a really good season, 36 tackles, 7 tackles for loss and a sack, a forced fumble for them last year, and was a very productive player for Pitt last season. I mean, if you watch the Notre Dame game, he was by far their best lineman in that game. Francis Brew also had 20 pressures this season, 5 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. He had 18 run stops. So he was a guy that was very productive for Pitt this season. He was the number one guy on the interior of the defensive line in run stops, and he was number 2, I believe, in pressures. Yes, Nick James had 23 pressures last season, and Nick James had 3 more pressures and 1 more hit plus sack on the quarterback, but he played 60 more pass rush snaps than did Francis Brew. So his success rate on a per snap basis was much better, and all season only had 4 missed tackles all season. So this is a guy that last season kind of already had that second level breakout for Pitt. So now it's like if he has, and like Justin K just said, I see Brew as having as a level 2 impact. I agree with Justin on that one. The problem is that's not a breakout season for Francis Brew. So for Francis Brew, the only kind of breakout that I think he has is twofold. Number one is he can jump into that elite category and have like a Riley Mills. I mean, look, Notre Dame's produced multiple All-American D tackles the last few years. Howard Cross was that in 2023. You had that from Riley Mills in 2024. Jerry Tillery was one in 2018. So a Notre Dame player at D tackle becoming a second-team All-American is not a stretch. We've seen that in 2 of the last 3 years. That, to me, would be a breakout for Francis Brew. That's asking a lot of him, though. And I don't know that that's what we're going to see from Francis Brew. My hope, and this kind of speaks to Justin's comment, I want him to kind of replicate what he did last season. If Francis Brew comes to Notre Dame and he has 36 tackles and 7 tackles for loss, he would be more productive than anybody that Notre Dame had at D tackle this season. Notre Dame's leader from a tackles for loss standpoint on the D tackle was Jared Dawson, who had 3.5. After that, Elijah Hughes had 3. Jason Onye had 1.5. Armel Mukam had 1.5. Donovan Heinisch had 1. Cole Mullins had a half a tackle for loss, and Gabriel Rubio had half a tackle for loss. From a sack standpoint, your top performer from a sacks standpoint at D tackle was Jason Onye with 1.5. Donovan Heinisch had 1. Elijah Hughes had 1, and Jared Dawson only had half of a tackle for loss, and with Gabriel Rubio. So if Francis Brew comes in and repeats what he did at Pitt, that's a level 2 impact. But is it a level 2 breakout? From a production standpoint, it is not. Having said that, let's be honest about something. If you have a similar type of season at Notre Dame that you have at Pitt, you're going to have a chance to get a lot more national recognition. That's just the reality. People may not like that, but that's the reality. Other than tackles, his numbers weren't a whole lot different than what Howard Cross had in 2023. You know, Francis Brew last season had 18 solo tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 1 sack in 13 games. If you look at Howard Cross in 2023, when he was a second-team All-American, he had 28 solo tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks in 13 games. Almost identical, with the exception of tackles, is what Francis Brew had last year as a true sophomore. Howard Cross did that as a 5th-year player, and then obviously came back in 2024 as a 6th-year player. So I think that you could see that level 2 type of impact from Francis Brew, which is what Justin K said. He didn't say he would be a level 2 breakout. He said level 2 impact, because level 2 impact is not necessarily a breakout season. However, it could, especially if he can maybe get us another sack or 2, or maybe have 5 to 10 more tackles, could result in him getting some All-American recognition after the season if the Notre Dame defense is as good as we think it will be or should be this season. So I think it's possible, but it's kind of funny. I think Francis Brew and DJ McKinney have the 2 lowest chances to have breakouts for Notre Dame, because they've already kind of done so. That's kind of where they are. And Southpaw 42 says, I think Brew's going to be a level 3 breakout. I'll say this, Southpaw, if you are correct on that, then Notre Dame's defensive line is going to be unbelievably good, because level 3 breakout is something along the line. I mean, that's an all-American season. Like, no doubt about it, all-American season for him to be a level 3 breakout. That's, 10 tackles for loss, 8 to 10 tackles for loss, 40 plus tackles, at least 3-4 sacks. That's a heck of a season for him. And it's not that he's not capable of it. It's just that is a breakout season for him. If he has that kind of season, then this Notre Dame defensive line is going to be very, very good. So I love your optimism there. I'm saying, I think I'm with Justin K. I have his impact more in that level 2, 40 tackles, 6 to 7 tackles for loss, 1 to 2 sacks. And I think that's where that production is going to be. You could make a case that he'll be surrounded by better talent around him. Well, actually, that's not the case that I think you can make. That's a given, I think. I think you can make the case that due to that talent around him, it's going to be easier for him to get solo blocked and get to the football and things along those lines, assuming that Chris Ash lets him attack. And if that's the case, then I think there is a chance that he can have that level 3 breakout. The talent's there to be a very impactful player. That's a big, big breakout. And I'm not quite ready to go there yet. I may change my mind when we get a chance to see him this spring. But right now, I'm having him at level 2. Let's go to the other inside guy. I think Keon Gray has a much better opportunity to have a breakout season than Francis Brew. And it's not that I think Keon Gray is going to be better than Francis Brew. I think Francis Brew is going to start for Notre Dame this year. I don't know that Keon Gray is going to start for Notre Dame this year. I mean, I really don't care. I think it's more for him. It's more so about, I just want him to be a very important part of the rotation. Last year for Oregon, he had 18 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. He didn't have any sacks last season for Oregon. He was a very important part of their rotation. They had a 5-6 man rotation on the interior of the defensive line last season. You had, you obviously had your starters. You had Amari Washington. You had Bear Alexander. They both had over 500 snaps last year. You had Terrence Green, who had 269 snaps last year. Keon Gray had 232 snaps last year. Those guys were primarily, Aiden Breland played some last season as well. But what you didn't see from Keon Gray last year was the high-level production. 18 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and he played 15 games. I believe 15 games. Let me just go. Yeah, 15 games last season. 13 games. I guess he missed 2 games last year. But he only had 1 pressure all season, and he only had 6 run stops last season. I think in Notre Dame's defense, if they allow him to do more of what Notre Dame has done, I think there's a place for him to have more production. I don't know that they're going to use him in a way that allows him to be a 6-7 tackle for loss, 3 sack kind of guy, at least not in 2026. I think Keon Gray has a really good, important season. I see him as having a sort of a level 1 impact where a level 2 impact where he goes from being a kind of a rotation player to a more impactful player. I think you'll see him have better numbers this season than 18 tackles, 2 tackles for loss. But even more importantly, I think his overall impact is going to be greater because of what they're allowing him to do. The Notre Dame defense, at least it did last year, allowed their D tackles to penetrate a little bit more. I don't know that you're going to want to be having him shoot gaps all the time, but perfect examples. Look what Riley Mills did in the Super Bowl. I think Keon Gray is a guy that can make more plays at Notre Dame doing that than he did at Oregon, where a lot of times you're just watching him play and he's just kind of coming off and he's locking down and he's eating up a double team and he's not necessarily being asked to go anywhere or at least attack a gap. It's like you're just trying to push a guy back, reset the line of scrimmage, but not necessarily get off to the football. What was interesting is there were a lot of snaps last year where he was able to get like a push, but what he couldn't do, or actually didn't even look like he was trying to do, was get off to the football. I think that's going to be the difference. You're going to still see him drive people back, but now I think at Notre Dame, under Charlie Partridge and with what Chris Ash asked his D tackles to do last year, I think they're going to ask him to make more plays on the ball. And I think in 2027, you see him really take that big jump and become a real difference maker for Notre Dame. So I think you're going to see him be a very productive part of the rotation. I think he's a guy that's going to average probably between 20 to 25 snaps a game for Notre Dame on defense next season. I don't think he's going to be a 40-plus snap per game guy. I think there'll be some weeks he gets to 30, depending on what teams are trying to do. But I also think he's a guy that may not play a lot in the second halves as you get big leads on people and they have to throw the football. So that could factor into it as well. But he's going to be a guy you're so happy you have in the postseason. There's no question about that. So my prediction for Keon Gray is more of a level 2 impact, not from a production standpoint, but more from an impact of his production won't necessarily jump a ton. I think it will jump, but not a ton. But I think what you're going to see behind him and Brew, with Onye coming back and hopefully Armel Mukum, hopefully being able to take that jump. He's a returner that I think could be an impact guy. I think you could see an impact at the production at linebacker because of them. I just have this vision of Brew coming off the line and Keon coming off the line, and they're occupying 3-4 blockers. And then all of a sudden, Drake Bowen's just coming right around on a stunt, blowing the quarterback up. Or Jaden Osbury is, or Kingston is, or Matt Faramo is, or Jalen Sneed is. I think that's where you're going to see that level of production. And then Ben Tarnowski asked, do you think he'd play against Navy at all? I think he'd be a great player to have against Navy. Just put him right in the middle and just say, dude, your job is to blow up the middle of the defensive line. Absolutely. And if you want a little insight, remember last year against Navy, Notre Dame put Sean Sevillano on the field early against Navy. I think it was the second series of the game. They put Sean Sevillano on the field because they wanted that big body to just kind of blow up the middle of the line. I think Keon Gray could absolutely be that, Ben. So that's a great question. And I think he would be a great fit against that Navy offense. And he's definitely a guy that you're going to want to have on the field against like Miami. And they're going to have a bigger offensive line. They're going to want to run the football. At least they did this year. He's the kind of guy you're going to want against, Stanford, and they're going to be more of a pro-style team. They're going to ride Michael Ford a little bit more, in my opinion. You're going to want him in some of those games where teams are really being more forceful with their attempts to run the football. That's where he's going to have his impact. Let's stay on the D-line and let's move outside and let's talk a little bit about Keon Keely. This is a great story, in my opinion, with Keon coming back to Notre Dame. Honestly, Keon should have come to Notre Dame out of high school. He didn't. He chose a different path. But now he's back. And where he always should have been at Notre Dame. And this is a great story. I was happy to see he was already down to 270 on the spring roster. I think that's smart. I wouldn't mind them getting a little bit more weight off him. For me with Keon, I'd love to see Keon get all the way down to like 260 and then get a lot of the not great weight off of him and then slowly work 5 to 8 pounds back on from there of just muscle and twitchy, explosive muscle. That's what I'd like to see them do with Keon. So let's talk about Keon Keely as a breakout. Keon has all 3 breakout levels in front of him. When you have 18 tackles and 3 sacks and you play the amount of snaps he played last year, which wasn't a lot, you can have a first-level breakout. You become a very important part of the rotation. I mean, if he repeats basically what Josh Burnham did last year, that's a level 1 breakout season for him. Now, obviously, he'd probably do it and he'd get more snaps and things like that. But the point is, I could certainly see Keon coming to Notre Dame as the number 3 defensive end. A guy that maybe backs up both Boubacar and Bryce Young, or maybe he just backs up one of them. And he has a season where he has, 19 pressures like Josh Burnham did last year, 5 hits plus sacks on the quarterback, 3 tackles for loss. I think Josh had 3 sacks. I think Josh had also last year 6 tackles for loss. Let me pull up Notre Dame stats real quick and get that specific. Yeah, Josh was third on the team in tackles for loss at 6. He had 3 sacks, which tied for third on the team also last season. I could see Keon doing that, and I think that's a level 1 breakout, borderline level 2 breakout. Level 2 breakout for me would be more, you look at the overall production in the regular season. I think it's kind of like level 2 would be doing what Josh Burnham did in the second half of the season all year. So the level 1 breakout is him repeating what Josh Burnham's production was for the season: 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. But if he can kind of do what Josh did for the entire second half, But if he can do it over the course of a full season, now you're talking about a guy that has sort of like 8 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and is a much more impactful player. And when he's on the field, you're not missing a beat from when Bryce or Bubakar are on the field. That's a level 2 breakout for Keon to me. Level 3 breakout for Keon is he becomes the guy opposite Bubakar. And Bryce kind of has the same role he had last year. Keon becomes that number 1 guy on one of the end spots. He becomes that starter. His run defense improves. His pass rush really takes off, and he becomes a difference maker. I don't know that Keon is capable of that this season because, number 1, his game's got to grow. He's got to continue to reshape his body. And the biggest reason, honestly, it's the same with Milin Graham. It's look who's in front of him. It's Bryce Young and Bubakar Traore, who are more established players, more proven players, more productive players. I don't know that Keon is going to become that co-stud at defensive end this season. My hope for Keon is that level 2 breakout, that 6 to 8 tackles for loss over the course of 15, 16 games, 4 to 5 sacks over the course of 15, 16 games. And when we look at him, we're like, boy, you couldn't tell sometimes who was on the field at defensive end. Was it Bubakar? Was it Bryce? Was it Keon? You couldn't tell. He was that wave guy. You could just throw it and like, dude, it doesn't matter who we got on there. We're going to keep coming at you. That to me is what I think Keon is capable of in 2026. That's what my expectation is for Keon in 2026. Then when Bubakar leaves after this year, which is likely to happen in my opinion, if Bubakar can stay healthy, then Keon can in 27, along with Bryce Young, be the bookends, and that's when he has that real monster breakout. 8+ sacks, 10+ tackles for loss, that kind of impact player. Now, if there's an injury to Bubakar, Bryce Young, then Keon, obviously will get more opportunities. But even then, I think he'll have more of a Bubakar breakout season from 2025 than he would a monster level 3 type of breakout. That's how I view it. So what's the expectation for Keon? I think as Notre Dame fans, we're still kind of looking at this like Keon is that former 5-star recruit. And I believe that talent is still there. But it's been 3 years since he's been that player. I think asking him to be that right away is letting our emotions of Keon finally showing up maybe overtake our practicality when it comes to what a more natural, I say rational. That's not a way. That's not the word I want. I'm trying to think of the word to use, but more likely. I think more likely is the word I'm looking for. Type of breakout. That's what I think we're going to see from Keon. And then in year 2, that's when you see the big breakout. If I'm wrong, I'd love to be wrong. And now it's like, dude, they got 3 first-round picks at defensive end. That'd be amazing. I just don't want to put too much pressure on Keon in year 1 to live up to his 5-star billing that I think some Notre Dame fans expect him to do. I think he's capable of it, but I think he's capable of it more so in year 2 than in year 1, which is exactly what we said about Bryce Young last year. So that's kind of my stance on Keon Keely. But here's what I'll say. They need him to have that level 2 breakout this season. Because right now, after the top 3, there's a lot of question marks at defensive end. Logan Thomas checked in at 207 pounds and for the first winter conditioning. That's not ideal. We don't know what Dom Hulak and Joe Reif, where are they going to be this year in year 2? You've got your true freshmen talented, but they're still true freshmen. I think there's a lot of question marks at defensive end. There's a lot of talent, but a lot of question marks. If anything happens to the top 3, or if one of the top 3 doesn't perform to what Notre Dame needs them to be, then you could start to have some issues because you don't want to have to be playing Bubakar 50+ snaps a game every week because you don't have anybody else. That's not an ideal situation. So Notre Dame really needs Keon, in my opinion, just like they really need Francis Brew to keep rolling. They really need Keon to come in and be an impactful player. Let's wrap up here. I'm gonna reserve DJ McKinney for now because I want to wait till the fall since he won't be here in the spring. Jaden Sanders is an interesting player from Michigan. We had not a super chat, but we did have a question Down here from Jay Melvin, he says, Brian, how high were you on Jaden Sanders coming out of high school? I know a lot of Michigan people thought he could be a star in time. I wasn't quite that high on him. I didn't have Leonard Moore vibes from him when he was coming out of high school. I do think he's a good player, though. You know, he's a guy, to me, coming out of high school that's a kind of on the same level of Chaz Smith, top 120 to 150 caliber player, 4.5-star upside. He's tall, he's physical, he can run. I don't know that I don't view him as having like Leonard Moore speed, but he runs well. He's more Cam Hart from a speed standpoint than I would say than Leonard Moore. Smart football player, was a pretty good offensive player coming out of high school. Did a nice job this year for Michigan. Came in as a freshman. I think he had started 2 or 3 games, but he was a part of the rotation all season last year at Michigan. Earned 303 snaps last year for the Wolverines. He gave up 15 catches on 21 targets. So that's a 71.4% completion percentage allowed. Part of that is because they play a lot of cover 3 when he was in the game. And so there's a lot of completions. I went back and watched like 4 or 5 of the games he played in. He's playing 8 yards off the ball, pedaling at the snap. They throw a hitch in front of him. He drives the ball, makes the tackle. That's a completion allowed. On cover 3, that's not, the cornerback's not going to make that play a whole lot, not to the field. And especially to the field. And he played a little bit of both for them last year. So, he only gave up 127 yards. That's 8.5 yards per catch. That's a pretty good yards per target number. That is a 6.0 yards per target number. Just to give you a little bit of context, I'm going to pull up Leonard Moore from his freshman year. Leonard, see here, he gave up 293 yards as a freshman on, let's see here, 293 divided by 56. He gave up 5.2 yards per completion as a true freshman. So you can kind of see that, and obviously Leonard was better, but it's not that far off. What did I say Jaden was? He was at what, 6.04, did I say? Let's see, 127 divided by 21. Yeah, 6.04, 6.05. So he's not that far off of what Leonard Moore was as a true freshman. And obviously Leonard played more so in the boundary once he got in the starting lineup, the second time he got starting lineup. You look at what Benjamin Morrison did as a freshman. Benjamin gave up 296 yards on 51 targets. That's 5.8 yards per attempt. That's just barely better than what Jaden Sanders was. Now, the difference is Benjamin obviously played a lot more man coverage than what Jaden was allowed to do last year. He was a very heavy zone player. Early in the season, he was a good tackler. Later in the season, his tackling wasn't as good. I think it's one of those things where they protected him a little bit because he was a freshman. But I thought he looked smart. He can run. He's capable of being a good tackler. I think his breakout this season, to me, is going to be more so of a level 1 breakout for now. But I do think there's a chance for a level 2 breakout. Right now, I project DJ McKinney to be the starter opposite Leonard Moore. He's not going to be here this spring. So what is Notre Dame going to do? Are they going to leave Christian Gray outside opposite Leonard Moore and not move him inside like the original plan was? Or do they still make that move of Christian to the slot, and then now Jaden Sanders gets an opportunity along with Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary to battle for that starting field position? I think he has that opportunity to compete for that. And if he does, a level 1, level 2 breakout is certainly possible for Jaden Sanders. That's going to be a little tough because he's going to have to compete against Dallas Golden. He's going to have to compete against Mark Zachary, and he's going to have to compete against Kari Adams and Aiden Pouncey and Chaz Smith. So there's going to be a lot of competition there. And then also, I think he may cross-train a little bit and get some opportunities to kind of see what he can do in the boundary as well and see if he can, maybe be comfortable there. So I think he's going to be a very important depth piece, but he's going to have his hands full. Obviously when DJ McKinney comes back, he's going to have to go against Dallas Golden, Mark Zachary, and then the true freshmen who are outstanding. If he can survive that and be the sort of the last man standing among that group, then I think he's a guy that if he's good enough to beat some of those guys out. If he does, then I think a level 2 breakout is going to happen. If he ends up being the starting cornerback opposite Leonard Moore, because they do decide to put Christian Gray inside, He's got a shot to win that battle. And if he does, then I think he's got a chance to have that level 2 breakout. I think if he wins the job, it also is likely evidence that Notre Dame wants to do a lot more zone coverage to the field next year, and Jaden Sanders fits that pretty well. So does DJ McKinney. I think both of them winning starting jobs tells me that. If they play Christian Gray more, it tells me they want to be more aggressive and play more man. I'm okay actually with that. I think you can do some things that are aggressive with your outside corner, playing a little bit more cover 3. It's what you do with everything else that's going to determine that, in my opinion. So we'll see how they play that, but I think that's what gives Jaden Sanders a chance to be a level 2 breakout for Notre Dame. So that's my predictions for breakouts this year. Be curious what you guys think. We'll talk about it more so on the board as well. You guys can hit me up on there if we want to talk about further. And then also I wanted to point out too, at irishbreakdown.com, if you go there, we actually have a free message board at irishbreakdown.com. It's not the premium board. It's part of the free front page site. There's a community page down there that you can sign up for the site. It's free, doesn't cost you anything. And we're starting to put some more content there. I won't be engaging in some of the long conversations that we have, like on the premium board. My attention still is going to go there. But it's a place for some of you who don't want to pay for the premium board, don't have the ability right now to pay for the premium board, that want to chat with other Notre Dame fans. You can go to irishbreakdown.com, and then underneath the main stories, you'll see the community post page. You can go down there and sign up and engage there and continue some of these conversations that we're having from the show. So you can do that. As I said, that's on the free site at irishbreakdown.com.